For nearly 3 decades, Graham Norton has built a reputation as one of British television's smoothest talk show hosts, a man who can turn dead air into a punchline and a nervous guest into a viral moment. But even Norton, by his own account, has had nights on that famous red sofa that no amount of charm could rescue. Over the years, in scattered interviews and festival appearances, he's pointed to a handful of guests whose visits he remembers as genuinely difficult. Here's what he said about 6 of them. The most infamous case dates back to 2013, when Wahlberg appeared alongside Michael Fassbender and Sarah Silverman to promote Broken City. According to Norton, the actor seemed completely normal for the first 20 minutes or so of taping. Charming, sharp, in control. Then, seemingly all at once, whatever he'd had to drink before arriving caught up with him. Norton has described the shift as sudden and total. Wahlberg began talking over his fellow guests, derailing the flow of conversation, and at one particularly memorable moment climbed into Norton's lap on camera. He continued through the taping in a noticeably impaired state, slurring through bits that no longer landed. Speaking at the Henley Literary Festival years later, Norton made a point of clarifying how these situations actually happen. Guests who show up intoxicated do so on their own, not because of anything the show does. He's called the Wahlberg episode a strange one specifically because there was no warning sign at first. The effects only became obvious well into filming, and by the end, even Fassbender, mid-anecdote, looked over to find Wahlberg had fallen asleep. The clip circulated widely online afterward, with reactions split between viewers who found it hilarious and those who found it uncomfortable to watch. Wahlberg later addressed it lightly in the press, acknowledging he'd had a few drinks before the show and chalking it up to a good time that got a little out of hand. For Norton, though, it's remained the answer he reaches for whenever he's asked to name his most difficult guest, a story he tells with a shrug rather than any real bitterness, but one he's never hesitated to bring up. If Wahlberg's episode was chaotic, Norton has described his encounter with Mickey Rourke as simply draining. Rourke arrived, by Norton's account, already disengaged, slouched, sunglasses on, seemingly uninterested in performing for the cameras at all. Norton has told interviewers that Rourke wanted to smoke constantly throughout the taping, lighting cigarette after cigarette despite studio rules, and that the whole experience left him feeling less like a chat show host and more like a chaperone trying to keep a reluctant group on task. Rourke's answers reportedly came in short, flat fragments, offering little for Norton or the other guests to build on, and long stretches of the interview had to be padded or trimmed in the edit just to keep the episode watchable. Crew members who worked on the taping have suggested it wasn't hostility so much as total indifference. Rourke, by their account, simply didn't want to be there and didn't try to hide it. Rourke himself has never shown much interest in smoothing things over publicly. In later interviews, he's dismissed the whole genre of glossy UK chat shows as something he has little patience for, framing his own persona as rooted in a rawer authenticity than that format allows. There is never an open dispute between the two men, but Norton has made clear that Rourke never made his personal shortlist for a repeat invitation. Not every difficult interview involves chaos. Sometimes, according to Norton, the problem is the opposite. When Kevin Costner appeared on the show, Norton has said the two of them simply never found a rhythm. Costner met his questions with brief, guarded answers, seemingly unmoved by the kind of quick-witted back and forth that usually carries the show. What made the encounter more noticeable, in Norton's telling, was watching Costner visibly relax and engage the moment another guest, Helen Mirren, spoke to him, in sharp contrast to his response to Norton's own questions. Norton has framed it not as rudeness, but as a simple mismatch of styles. Some guests, he suggested, just aren't built for the loose, performative energy of a live entertainment format, and pushing them into it only stretches the segment out. Costner has never directly addressed the exchange, though he has spoken more broadly about preferring conversations that feel genuine over ones that feel like a performance for an audience. A comment Norton has taken, fairly or not, as evidence the two of them were simply looking for different things out of the same 20 minutes. There was no falling out, just, as Norton has put it, a pleasant enough man who wasn't quite his kind of evening. Few names carry more weight in film than Robert De Niro's, and Norton has said that was exactly the problem. The audience arrived expecting stories from a career built on iconic performances. Instead, they got long pauses, cautious one-line answers, and very little momentum. Norton has recalled trying every trick available to him. Teasing questions, self-deprecating jokes, gentle prompts, without much success. At one point, in a moment Norton has referenced more than once in later interviews, De Niro began what sounded like it might turn into a good story before appearing to lose interest in telling it himself, leaving both Norton and the audience with nowhere to go, and the moment was eventually cut from the broadcast. Reflecting on the interview years later at a literary festival appearance, Norton described De Niro as someone who isn't naturally inclined to narrate his own life on demand. Not unfriendly, just quiet, and not particularly interested in filling silence for its own sake. De Niro, for his part, has said in interviews that he considers himself more of a listener than a talker and has never framed his reserved public manner as anything unusual for him. Norton's takeaway, as he's told it since, is less about any personal friction and more a case of two very different professional instincts colliding. His own built around conversation and momentum, De Niro's built around economy and control. According to Norton, Daryl Hannah's appearance was memorable not for what happened, but for how little did. He's described her as detached from the moment she sat down, answering in single words, her attention seemingly elsewhere, offering nothing for him to build a conversation around. Norton has said the experience left him second-guessing himself in real time, wondering if he'd said something wrong, even though nothing seemed to explain the silence. Production staff who were present have suggested it wasn't diva behavior so much as visible discomfort. Hannah, by their account, seemed tense before filming even began and simply didn't want to be part of the format that night. Hannah has spoken since about her general unease with the performative expectations of talk shows, suggesting in past interviews that being charming or funny on command has never come naturally to her, and that she'd rather not force it. For Norton, that context hasn't made the memory of the interview any less uncomfortable in hindsight. He's referenced it more than once as one of the toughest 20 minutes he's had to fill on air. The last name on Norton's list stands apart from the rest, and not because of any awkward silence or drunken interruption. Norton has said that when Weinstein appeared on the show, he carried himself less like a guest and more like someone who expected the room to revolve around him, steering nearly every exchange back toward his own success and talking over the natural rhythm of the segment. At the time, Norton has said he read that behavior the way most of the industry did, as the confidence of a powerful producer used to getting his way. It's only in hindsight, following Weinstein's conviction on multiple counts related to sexual assault, that Norton has said the same behavior reads very differently to him. Speaking publicly after the verdict, Norton named Weinstein as his least favorite guest without qualification, noting the grim distinction that Weinstein, unlike everyone else on his list, ended up in prison. Norton has also said that Weinstein wasn't originally on the show's guest list at all, that he pushed his own team to book him directly, a level of insistence Norton once shrugged off as typical producer pushiness, and has since described as unsettling in light of everything that came out later. When Weinstein's